The massive research vessel Astral Horizon drifted silently through the void, its crystalline observation domes glittering under distant starlight. Inside Laboratory Complex 7, Dr. Sarah Chen tried to ignore the whispers that followed her through the corridors. After 6 months on board the Joint Species Research Vessel, she was used to being treated like a curiosity, or worse, a liability. The Vaxians, with their towering crystalline bodies, considered her frighteningly fragile. The Meridians, sporting their protective exoskeletons, watched her bare skin with barely concealed horror. Even the amorphous still seemed concerned about having such a vulnerable species aboard their prestigious research vessel. Sarah focused on her work instead, carefully adjusting the containment field around their latest specimen, a particularly aggressive form of spaceborne bacteria that seemed to thrive on stellar radiation. The organism had already eaten through 3 standard containment fields, but Sarah had theorized that a modulated frequency might. A sharp alarm cut through her concentration. Red warning lights began pulsing throughout the laboratory as the main computer announced, "Warning. Containment breach detected in Laboratory Complex 7. Emergency protocols initiated." Sarah's head snapped up to see the impossible. The bacteria colony was rapidly expanding, creating microscopic fractures in the supposedly impenetrable quantum glass. The Vaxian senior researcher, Dr. Kylix, rushed into the room, his crystalline form vibrating with panic. "Evacuate immediately," he ordered. "The containment systems are failing. We must seal off this entire section." But Sarah didn't move. Her mind was already racing through possibilities, connecting dots that others might miss. This bacteria didn't just eat through containment fields. It adapted to them. Each failed attempt at containment had only made it stronger. "Wait," she called out, her fingers flying across the control panel. "The traditional containment methods are making it worse. We need to try something different." "Human." Kylix's voice carried the particular tone of forced patience she'd grown familiar with. "You must evacuate. Your organic form is particularly vulnerable to..." "To what?" "A bacteria that feeds on energy." Sarah didn't look up from her work. "My fragile organic form might actually be the safest thing in this room right now. This organism doesn't care about flesh. It wants energy. And right now, it's about to have an all-you-can-eat buffet if it reaches the station's power grid." Her fingers danced across the controls as she explained. "We've been trying to contain it with energy fields, but that's like trying to stop a fire by throwing fuel at it. We need to do the opposite." She began shutting down systems, one by one. "We need to starve it." "Impossible," Kylix protested. "The specimen requires containment." "The specimen requires energy," Sarah corrected, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "And right now, everything in this room except me is giving it exactly what it wants. Trust me, just this once." The lights in the laboratory flickered and died as Sarah initiated her desperate plan. Emergency backup systems kicked in, then fell silent as she overrode them. One by one, every energy-producing system in the laboratory went dark. Only the battery-powered emergency lights remained, casting long shadows across the now silent room. In the dim light, they watched as the bacterial colony's growth slowed, then stopped. Without energy to feed on, it began to contract, returning to its dormant state. "Fascinating," Kylix whispered, his crystalline form catching what little light remained. "You didn't try to contain it at all. You simply removed its food source." Sarah finally allowed herself to breathe normally again. Sometimes the best solution isn't about being stronger or more resilient. It's about understanding your opponent and adapting your approach. She gave him a slight smile, something humans have gotten very good at over the years. Indeed, Kylix's tone had changed, carrying a new note of respect. Perhaps we have been insufficient in our understanding of human capabilities. Sarah began the process of setting up a new containment system, one that would use minimal energy and rely more on physical barriers. We humans learned a long time ago that being the strongest isn't always the answer. Sometimes, being clever, being adaptable, being willing to think differently, those are the traits that matter most. As other researchers began filtering back into the laboratory, the whispers that followed Sarah had a different quality now. She could hear the change in their tones, see the shift in how they watched her work. She hadn't needed super strength or natural armor or energy-based biology to save the day. She just needed what humans had always relied on: the ability to think creatively and act decisively. Later that evening, as she filed her report on the incident, Sarah couldn't help but smile. Today had been a small victory, not just for her, but for humanity's reputation among the stars. Sometimes it took a crisis to show that strength came in many forms, and that being fragile didn't mean being weak. Little did she know, this incident would only be the beginning of a much larger change in how humans were perceived among the stars, and her role in it was far from over. News of the containment breach incident spread through the astral horizon like wildfire, morphing and changing with each retelling. By the time Sarah arrived at the morning research briefing 3 days later, she found herself the center of far more attention than she'd ever wanted. The massive briefing chamber, designed to accommodate species of all sizes, felt suddenly small under the weight of so many alien gazes. Commander Vexterra, the ship's Meridian captain, stood at the head of the chamber. Her iridescent exoskeleton caught the light as she moved, but it was her next words that truly caught everyone's attention. "The Research Council has concerns." Sarah felt her heart sink. She'd been expecting this, but that didn't make it any easier. Dr. Chen's unorthodox methods, while effective, have raised questions about human participation in high-risk research activities. Vexterra continued. "Traditional safety protocols exist for a reason." "With respect, Commander," Sarah stood, her voice steady despite her racing pulse. "Those protocols nearly caused a catastrophic breach. Sometimes we need to adapt." Precisely the issue at hand, a new voice cut in. Sarah turned to see Council Member Zox, a Vaxian elder whose crystalline form seemed to radiate disapproval. "Humans are constantly adapting our carefully established procedures. It creates uncertainty, chaos." Sarah fought to keep her frustration in check. "Adaptation isn't chaos, it's survival." "Then prove it." Zox's challenge rang through the chamber. "If humans are truly capable of handling high-risk situations, prove your species' competence in a controlled setting." The trials of capability. A murmur ran through the assembled researchers. The trials were traditionally reserved for security personnel, not scientists. They tested not just physical prowess, but decision-making under pressure, tactical thinking, and crisis management. "I accept," Sarah said before she could second-guess herself. The room erupted in shocked whispers. Commander Vexterra's antennae twitched in surprise. "Dr. Chen, the trials are extremely demanding. Even for species with natural defenses." "I don't need natural defenses," Sarah interrupted, her mind already racing through possibilities. "I just need my brain, and maybe a few basic tools." "The standard equipment package will be provided," Zox stated, his tone making it clear he expected her to fail. "The trials begin in 3 cycles. Do not expect any special accommodations for your limitations." As the briefing dispersed, Dr. Kylux approached Sarah. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he observed. "The trials are designed to push even the most capable beings to their limits." Sarah smiled, already mentally cataloging everything she knew about the station's various species and their testing methods. "You know what humans are really good at, besides adaptation: pattern recognition and preparation." The next 3 cycles passed in a blur of research and preparation. Sarah spent every free moment studying footage of previous trials, analyzing the testing patterns, and understanding the underlying logic of each challenge. Where others saw random obstacles, she began to see patterns. Where others saw impossible physical challenges, she saw opportunities for creative solutions. The morning of the trials arrived with the same red warning lights that had started this whole situation. Sarah stood in the preparation chamber. surrounded by beings who could crush her without effort. The first challenge would test crisis response, a simulated emergency in one of the station's critical systems. As the chamber doors opened, Sarah took a deep breath. She wasn't the strongest, fastest, or most naturally protected being here, but she was human, and humans had turned surviving against the odds into an art form. The first simulation threw them into a reactor core malfunction, while the other participants immediately rushed to manually override the systems, a task that required enormous physical strength. Sarah took a different approach. She quickly analyzed the error patterns in the reactor's output. "It's not a core malfunction," she announced, her fingers flying over the control panel. "It's a cascade failure in the cooling systems. Override attempts will only accelerate the meltdown." Instead of fighting the reactor's immense power, she began rerouting coolant through secondary systems, creating a temporary loop that would buy them time to properly diagnose and fix the actual problem. The observers watched in stunned silence as her unorthodox solution not only prevented the simulated disaster, but improved the system's overall efficiency. Sarah hadn't needed super strength to lift heavy machinery or natural armor to withstand radiation. She'd needed something uniquely human: the ability to step back, see the bigger picture, and find an unexpected solution. As she emerged from the first trial, Sarah caught Zox's crystalline gaze. The Vaxian elder's disapproval had been replaced by something else: curiosity, perhaps even the beginning of understanding. This was just the first challenge, but Sarah had already begun to show that human ingenuity could be just as valuable as any natural defense. The real test, however, was yet to come. As she prepared for the next trial, Sarah couldn't help but smile. They thought they were testing her limitations, but they were about to learn what humans did best: turning perceived weaknesses into unexpected strengths. Sarah was halfway through the physical endurance trial when the station's real emergency systems blared to life. At first, many thought it was part of the test, until Commander Vexterra's voice cut through the chaos with unmistakable urgency. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We have detected multiple unauthorized access attempts in critical systems. Security protocols are compromised." The massive training arena fell silent for a split second before erupting into controlled chaos. Sarah watched as her fellow trial participants, warriors and security specialists from a dozen different species, immediately moved to defensive positions. But something wasn't adding up in her mind. "Wait," she called out, her voice carrying over the commotion. "The timing of this is too perfect." Zox, who had been observing the trials, turned his crystalline form toward her. "Explain." "Think about it," Sarah said, already moving toward the nearest computer terminal. "Right when the station's best security personnel are concentrated in one location, focused on trials. This isn't random. Someone wanted us here." Her fingers flew across the holographic interface as she spoke. "And look at these access patterns. They're not trying to breach the most critical systems. Her eyes widened. "They're hurting us." Hurting. Commander Vexterra moved closer, her exoskeleton reflecting the emergency lights. "The breach attempts are designed to trigger specific security protocols. They're manipulating our response, trying to get us to follow standard procedures." Sarah's mind raced ahead, connecting dots. Because standard procedure would be to move all essential personnel to secure locations, exactly where they want us. The realization hit just as the arena's massive doors began to seal automatically. Sarah was already moving, overriding the door controls with emergency codes she'd memorized during her preparation for the trials. "They're not trying to break in. They're trying to lock us in." "Impossible," one of the Meridian security officers declared. "Our containment protocols are foolproof." "Nothing is foolproof," Sarah countered, her hand still working the controls. "Especially not to someone who knows exactly how we'll react. They're using our own procedures against us." The doors shuddered to a halt, half closed. Through the gap, they could see emergency barriers activating throughout the station's corridors, systematically cutting off sections of the ship. "How did you know?" Zox demanded, his crystalline form vibrating with tension. "Because it's exactly what I would do," Sarah admitted. "If I wanted to neutralize the station's defenses, I wouldn't try to overpower them. I'd use their own protocols and predictable responses to trap them." It's a very human way of thinking. Understanding dawned in Commander Vextera's compound eyes. "You believe one of your own kind is responsible?" "No." Sarah shook her head, already moving to the next terminal. "I think someone studied how humans think. We're not the strongest or most durable species, so we learn to use systems against themselves. Someone learned that lesson very well." Working quickly, Sarah began disabling automated systems across the station, returning control to manual overrides. The station's security isn't built to handle this kind of attack because it's not built to handle human-style thinking. But that gives us an advantage. We can be just as unpredictable. As if to prove her point, she grabbed a maintenance tool from her trial equipment and began rewiring the door's control panel. Standard procedure would be to try hacking the security codes or cutting through the doors. Instead, a panel sparked, and suddenly the emergency lights in their section went dark. In the pitch black, Sarah's voice continued, "We changed the rules." The darkness was filled with confused murmurs until, one by one, small emergency lights began to flicker on, but not the main systems. Sarah had created a primitive but functional alternative power grid, bypassing the compromised main systems. "I've isolated this section from the main network," she explained. "We can move through the maintenance corridors without triggering any automated responses. Whoever's doing this won't be able to track us through the station's systems." Commander Vextera's antennae twitched with what might have been approval. "You've given us back the element of surprise." "Better than that." Sarah smiled in the dim light. "I've given us a chance to think like humans. Now, who's ready to show our uninvited guests why that's terrifying?" As the assembled security forces began to move out, following Sarah's improvised route through the station's maintenance systems, she caught Zox watching her with an unreadable expression. "This was not part of the trials," he noted. "No," Sarah agreed, checking her improvised toolkit. "This is what happens when you push humans into a corner. We don't just survive. We get creative." The hunt was on, and for the first time, the station's most powerful beings were about to learn why humanity's greatest strength had never been in their muscles or armor, but in their endless capacity to adapt, improvise, and overcome. Moving through the maintenance tunnels of the astral horizon, Sarah led the unlikely strike team through the station's arteries. The diverse group of security personnel followed her lead with a newfound respect, watching as she navigated the complex network of service passages with practiced ease. "How do you know these routes so well?" a Meridian officer whispered as they passed another junction. "When I first arrived, everyone thought I was too fragile to work in the main labs," Sarah explained, checking a hand-drawn map she'd been updating. "So I spent a lot of time in maintenance, learning the station's real anatomy. Turns out being underestimated has its advantages." They emerged into a secondary computer core, where Sarah's suspicions were confirmed. The screens showed evidence of systematic attempts to isolate and control various station systems, but something about the attack pattern seemed familiar. "This isn't just human-style thinking," she muttered, studying the code scrolling across the screens. This is research code. Modified, but I recognize the base structure." She turned to Commander Vextera. "These are adaptations of containment algorithms, the same kind we use in xenobiology." The commander's antennae twitched. "Are you suggesting one of our researchers is responsible?" "Not exactly." Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. "The base code is from our containment systems, but it's being used in a way that shows deep understanding of both station systems and biological research. This isn't just a hack, it's an experiment." Suddenly, the screens flickered, and a new message appeared. "Fascinating adaptation. Perhaps humans are worth studying after all." Sarah's blood ran cold as understanding dawned. It's not a takeover attempt. We're the experiment. All of us. Before anyone could respond, A figure emerged from the shadows of a connecting corridor. It was a Zell, their amorphous form shifting and rippling in a way that suggested excitement rather than threat. Dr. Xanthi, Commander Vexterra's voice carried recognition and disbelief. "You're supposed to be at the Gamma Research Station. I found a more interesting research opportunity." The Zell researcher's translated voice carried an unsettling note of satisfaction. The interaction between different species under pressure, particularly how they adapt to unexpected situations. Humans especially have shown remarkable creativity. Sarah stepped forward, her mind working furiously. "You orchestrated all of this. The security breaches, the lockdown. A controlled experiment," Xanthi confirmed. "Though your solutions proved more innovative than anticipated, you've provided excellent data on human problem-solving capabilities. By putting the entire station at risk." Sarah's voice remained calm, but her mind was racing through implications and possibilities. "That's not research. That's reckless endangerment." The risk was calculated, the Zell dismissed. All systems could be restored with a single command. The real question was how different species would respond to perceived crisis, particularly how they would interact with a supposedly weaker species in a leadership role. Sarah noticed the security team tensing for action, but she held up a hand to stop them. She recognized something in Xanthi's behavior, the singular focus of a scientist lost in their research, unable to see the ethical implications of their actions. "Dr. Xanthi," she said carefully, "you're right that this is fascinating research. The interaction between species, the way we adapt to each other's strengths and weaknesses. It's important work." She took a step closer to the Zell. "But there are better ways to study this." "Better?" Xanthi's form rippled with interest. "Explain." "Look at what's happening right now." Sarah gestured to the diverse group behind her. "You wanted to study interspecies cooperation under pressure. It's happening naturally. No artificial crisis needed. We're all learning from each other, adapting our methods, combining our strengths." She continued, her voice taking on the passionate tone of a fellow researcher. "The real breakthrough isn't in how we handle crisis. It's in how we learn from each other. Every species here has something unique to offer, including humans, but forcing these interactions through manufactured emergencies, that just creates fear and distrust." The Zell's form shifted thoughtfully. "You suggest an alternative research methodology." "I suggest collaboration," Sarah replied. "Real, ethical research into how different species can work together effectively. We could learn so much more by studying willing participants who are actively trying to understand each other." Commander Vexterra stepped forward. "Dr. Chen speaks wisdom. The events of today have already demonstrated the value of combining different perspectives and abilities." Sarah watched as Xanthi's form cycled through various patterns, a sign of deep thought among the Zell. "Your proposal has merit, though my current methods have produced significant data. Data that's tainted by artificial conditions," Sarah pointed out. "Real understanding comes from genuine interaction, not manufactured scenarios. Let us show you a better way to conduct this research, one that builds trust instead of breaking it." 3 weeks after the incident with Dr. Xanthi, Sarah stood before the Research Council in a chamber that no longer felt quite so intimidating. The massive room, designed to accommodate beings of all sizes and compositions, was filled to capacity with representatives from every species aboard the Astral Horizon. "Dr. Chen," Council Member Zox began, his crystalline form catching the light differently now, somehow softer, more receptive. "Your handling of recent events has prompted a significant revaluation of human capabilities." Sarah smiled slightly. "I hope it's prompted a revaluation of all our capabilities and how they can work together." "Indeed." Commander Vexterra stepped forward, her exoskeleton gleaming. "Dr. Xanthi's methods were deeply flawed, but the underlying question was valid. How do different species adapt to each other? How can we combine our various strengths? Which brings us to your proposal," Zox continued. "A formal research program studying interspecies cooperation and adaptation. Explain your vision." Sarah moved to the center of the chamber, activating a holographic display she'd prepared. The events of the past month have shown us something crucial. Our differences aren't weaknesses. They're opportunities. Each species brings unique perspectives and abilities to the table. The display showed footage from the various crises they'd faced: the containment breach, the trials, the station takeover attempt. Humans aren't the strongest, fastest, or most naturally protected species here. But we've survived and thrived because we're adaptable. We see patterns. We find unexpected solutions. We turn limitations into advantages. She switched to a new display showing proposed training scenarios and research protocols. But imagine combining that human adaptability with Vaxian resilience, Meridian tactical strength, Zell analytical capabilities, and every other species' unique traits. Not in crisis, but in controlled ethical research environments where we can learn from each other. A bold proposal, one of the elder Zell researchers noted. But how would this differ from traditional cross-species training? Because we're not just training people to work together. We're studying how different species think, solve problems, and adapt to challenges. Then we're taking those insights and applying them to create new hybrid approaches to everything from research protocols to emergency response. Sarah gestured to Dr. Xanthi, who had been permitted to attend under supervision. Dr. Xanthi's mistake wasn't in wanting to study these interactions. It was in thinking they had to be forced. Real innovation comes from genuine collaboration, from people choosing to learn from each other. The chamber filled with thoughtful murmurs as Sarah continued. We've already seen it happening naturally. During the containment breach, we combined human problem-solving with Vaxian energy manipulation. During the trials, we merged human adaptability with traditional security protocols. Even during the station takeover attempt, we succeeded by combining different species' strengths. And you believe humans have something unique to contribute to this program? Socks asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Humans are natural connectors, Sarah explained. We see patterns others miss, adapt techniques from one field to another, and find ways to turn apparent weaknesses into strengths. We're not just participants in this research. We're bridges between different ways of thinking. Commander Vexterra's antennae twitched with what Sarah had learned to recognize as approval. The Council has reviewed your full proposal, Dr. Chen. We find it compelling, particularly the suggestion to incorporate elements from your Earth's history of adaptation and innovation. Which brings us to our decision, Zox announced. The Council approves the establishment of the Interspecies Adaptation Research Initiative under your leadership, Dr. Chen. Additionally, he paused, his crystalline form shimmering with what might have been amusement. We are formally retiring the previous assessment protocols for human personnel. They have proven inadequate. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not just for herself, but for all humans who would come after her. Thank you, Council members. I promise you won't regret this decision. We already don't, Commander Vexterra said softly. You've shown us that true strength isn't about natural armor or physical power. It's about the ability to adapt, to think differently, to bring people together. Perhaps that is humanity's greatest contribution to the stars. Not what you can do alone, but how you help us all work together. As the chamber erupted in approving sounds from a dozen different species, Sarah couldn't help but smile. They had started by underestimating humans, seeing only their physical limitations. Now they understood. Humanity's greatest strength had never been in their bodies, but in their minds and hearts, in their endless capacity to adapt, to learn, to bring people together. The stars had always seemed vast and challenging, filled with beings far more physically capable than humans. But as Sarah looked around the chamber at her alien colleagues, no, her friends, she knew that humanity had found its place among them. Not as the strongest or most durable, but as innovators, adapters, bridge builders between different ways of thinking and being. They had underestimated humans once. They wouldn't make that mistake again. And in learning to see humanity's true strength, they had all grown stronger together.